So let's talk about domain number 2, asset security, or protecting our security assets. Now, our key areas that we're going to touch on in this domain are going to be classifying or classify information and the supporting assets, determine and maintain ownership as far as when it comes to data in our systems, protecting our privacy, ensuring appropriate retention when it comes to that data. It's very important. Determine data security controls. Remember, we talked about countermeasures before. So countermeasures, controls, things we're putting in place to stop risks, stop threats, stop these vulnerabilities. And then finally, establish some handling requirements when it comes to our data. So the first one, let's talk about the classify information and supporting assets. Now, classification, we do this all the time. You may do it in your personal life and your personal situation at home with your data and your systems. You may have policies in your enterprise or your organization that says you have to classify data. Now, usually in our home environment, our home life, we don't have policies for your home where you say, well, this data has to be this or this data has to be that. But you may do it and you just don't think about it. You may put, say, system data on a particular drive, right? Your operating system, your applications. But you may take the other types of data, like your documents, your music, your videos, your whatever else that you have, and you may stick that on a different drive. Now, that's not saying it's secret or top secret or anything, but you're still classifying it in a way. Now, the classification that we're going to talk about is most often referred to when discussing the military or the United States government, their types of information on how they classify their information and all the data that they hold. Now, organizations do the same thing, but they may not use the same terminology. It's similar functions. Their data may be, say, like private or public use, instead of secret or top secret like we normally think of when we talk about the United States military or the United States government. Now, we use this classification system to keep things straight, to say who can do what. We use it to ensure information is going to be marked, labeled, if you will, in such a way that only those with the appropriate level of clearance can have access to that information. And again, we're talking about government entities here, but we can do this in our personal life or in your organizations as well. If that's marked private or confidential or for your eyes only or something like that, that's what it's for. And only people with those labels are able to see that. So in your organization, you may have something labeled confidential. Well, we know in our organization only confidential information can be read by board members and above, or the CEO, or team leads and above. And if it's marked private, maybe that's just for the business users, and public could be for everybody, for example. So we have to determine the classification that we want to use, the labels that we want to use for our organization or for our entity, and then we have to assign people to those labels in order for them to access the data or have the access to the data the right way. So let's look at some of these data classifications. I've mentioned secret and top secret, but top secret, if this information gets out, if we have disclosure of top secret information, it could result in exceptionally grave damage to national or international security. Again, when it comes to military and or government, like vital military intelligence data, cryptographic keys used to protect our communications to the guys in the fields, and detailed weapons designs. Those could all be classified as top secret. And you have to have certain clearance levels to see top secret data, to see this information. And even at that, sometimes even if you have the clearance, you may not be able to see that data, right? You may be on what they call a need-to-know basis. And even though you have top secret clearance, that data may go above that and say, well, it's top secret, but it's also need to know. Meaning, if I do this job function and the data that I'm trying to access has nothing to do with my job function, then I don't need to know. It does not affect what I'm doing. And you would have to get some type of permission, some type of access clearance to see that type of data. We also have secret classification. So we're kind of moving down the ladder, right? Secret, disclosure of this information could seriously damage national security, like significant intelligence and military plans, information, technical developments, and diplomatic strategies. If that information got out, it's not exceptionally grave, where it's going to cost maybe human lives and or billions of dollars, but this is still pretty damaging to national security. Knowing military plans, knowing intelligence plans could put lives at risk as well. If you have maneuvers and you're going to move troops in a particular area and that information gets out, well, that was secret information. That could have some impact on our national security. Now we also have confidential. So we have top secret, secret, confidential. Need to know about that. Now the disclosure could cause damage to national security, not serious damage, but any disclosure could cause damage. But we're talking about testing of military strength performance data, technical training, operations documents. You know, it's not things that we want to get out, but if somebody knows like our technical training or performance data, like, well, you know, these troops ran these drills and they scored, you know, this, and this. Well, you know, we don't want that information getting out because it's confidential to the United States military, but it's not going to be detrimental to the way the military does its day-to-day activities. It's not like they stole the plans or, you know, saw gravely damaging data. They just saw that a couple soldiers maybe couldn't pass a PT test, for example, or couldn't pass the range test, just as examples. So that's confidential information. It belongs to the military, and we don't want it to get out, and we're going to try to protect it. It's not like we're just not going to put any controls on there, but again, it's not going to cause serious damage to our national security. We may have something called sensitive but unclassified. Now, this information is not classified top secret, secret, or confidential, but if this still got disclosed, it could damage political national interests, not necessarily in the national security, but the dissemination is still restricted, so it protects our national interests. So we don't want it to get out necessarily. We're not just gonna, you know, throw it out there on a forum or on a web page or something, because it is still kind of sensitive data, but it's not going to be detrimental. It's not going to, you know, lead to loss of life, loss of money. It's just maybe more of like an embarrassment, something like that when we're talking about this sensitive data. And then we have unclassified, which is publicly available through the Freedom of Information Act, by the way. Now, it does have some special classifications, like unclassified for law enforcement only. So if you're not law enforcement, you may not be able to see that data. That could be assigned to restrict disclosure to certain organizations with, again, that need to know. So it is unclassified. It's supposed to be for everybody, but they put these special labels on there maybe for just law enforcement. So again, that goes back to that need to know. Even though you have that clearance level, like everybody has unclassified, it still falls under need to know. So you may not be able to access that data. You're going to have to, if it's something that you really want and it's unclassified data, you're going to have to go through the process of trying to get those records released. And some people do. They try to get that information to get it out to the public because some of that information needs to be known. Now, let's talk about determining and maintaining ownership. First, let's talk about data owners a little bit when it comes to ownership. Whenever information is created, Right? Let's say you sit down at a terminal and you start creating something. You are responsible for it. So when information is created, someone in the organization has to be directly responsible for it. Now that person, like I said, you sitting at the terminal that created that data, you support that data. You take care of that data. You are now the information owner or the data owner. It could be if you purchased or acquired the information to support the mission of an organization. You don't have to necessarily create it, but if you acquire that data somehow, now you are responsible for that. You are the data owner, the information owner, if you will. So you're responsible for bringing that data in or creating or giving birth to this data inside of our organization, but who's going to take care of it, right? That's a data custodian. These guys are established to ensure that important data sets are developed, maintained, and accessible within their defined specifications. Now, let's take that and talk about protecting our privacy. Again, when it comes to data owners, data processors, talk a little bit about data remnants and the collection limitation. So the data owners, we just kind of mentioned those guys, right? A person who either you've done it alone, you've done it jointly with a team, you determine the purpose for which and the manner in which any personal data are to be processed. So how that information is going to be processed is the data owner. Now, there are data protection laws that tend to converge around the principle that individuals should have control over their own personal information. I agree with that one, right? If it's my personal information, we do have those data protection laws in place to protect that data. That's my data. I'm the data owner. So I've created that data. I determine the purpose of how that data is going to be used. Now we also have the data processors. So in relation to personal data, means any person other than the employee of the data controller who processes the data on behalf of the data controller. So the data processor is the one that does something with that data. And the name probably gives it away, so I hope I'm not insulting your intelligence here, but data processors process the data from the data owner that created it and said how that information is going to be used. So the data processor will take that information that the data owner has created and do something with it. Now, sometimes when we have data, right, and remember, we're talking about the privacy of data right now, but let's say I had a hard drive. Could be a solid state hard drive or traditional hard drive with the moving parts. If I was to delete data off of there, right, because it happens, right, we're always writing and erasing and writing and deleting data on and off of our drives all the time. Well, we could have residual physical representations of the data that's been erased. That's called data remnants, the data that's kind of left behind. All right, because when we delete things off of that hard drive, it's not really gone for all intents and purposes. We say delete, and the operating system marks that information for deletion, but it doesn't really erase it, right? It's not like a pencil where we take it and we can erase it right off the paper. A hard drive is more like you take the pencil and instead of erasing it, you just kind of put a line through it and you say, okay, we can use this space later when we need it. Let's go ahead and use the rest of the hard drive first and we can come back to that. So the hard drive is there doing its job. You got the data moving in and out, but the operating system talks to the hard drive and says, hey, we need to get rid of this data. All right, we need to delete that. So it just marks it for deletion. Now, eventually it could get rid of it, right? It could delete it, but there could be some pieces that are still there. So once the storage media is erased, there may be some physical characteristics that could allow certain tools to reconstruct the data or pieces of that data or what the data may have looked like to give us an idea of what was on that drive. Now, I'm not going to jump all the way down into forensics, but that's what we're talking about here. If you got to get that data back off of that drive somehow because it was accidentally or intentionally erased, hopefully there's some data remnants on there where we can pull some of that information off or try to rebuild the data for our organization or for you personally, right? I'm sure I can't be the only one that's ever deleted something by accident or overwritten a file by accident, and I've tried to get that information back. Sometimes it's possible, sometimes it's not. If you don't have the right tools to get that information off and make that picture whole again, then it's usually not going to happen for you. But know that data remnants is the residual physical representation of data that's been erased in some way. All right, and we're going to talk about getting rid of data pretty soon when we talk about deleting and destroying data. But I want you to know about data remnants because that could affect your privacy. If you was to erase your hard drive, or let's say you want to get rid of your laptop and you want to sell it or just let somebody have it, and you wipe your hard drive, you erase your hard drive. Well, know that you could have some data remnants on there. You could have some information still kind of lurking on that hard drive somewhere, which if somebody that got your next laptop, if they had malicious intent, they might try to go into the hard drive and see if they could undelete or pull out some of that data. Right? A good friend of mine, he gave a talk on this very thing, and that's what he did. He went out and he looked for data remnants and notified the individuals of what was on the hard drives. All right, he's a certified ethical hacker. He's a white hat. He's a real good guy. So he had no malicious intent, but he ended up getting these hard drives from a well-known online auction site. Got those hard drives, looked at them with his class, in this class he was giving, and noticed there was data. They started reconstructing it, and he actually contacted the people where he bought the drives from. So it's there, it's possible. And again, you have to have the tools to go back and get that off. But don't take for granted that people don't have those tools, because they're out there, they're available, and people can get them and pull some of that old data off. Now, what about collection limitation? When we talk about collections, we need to think about, was it obtained fairly? Was it obtained lawfully? Right? How did they collect this information? You know, did they notify me that they were collecting this information? Did they do it lawfully, or did they get it from somebody else where that somebody else wasn't supposed to sell that information to them? You know, we talked about tons and tons of our data out there on the web and in logs and server logs and web logs and RFID chips. Well, how do they collect this information? Are they doing it lawfully? Are they doing it legally? Are they using it for the original specified purpose? You know, we need your email address because you signed up for this online newsletter. So we need your email address so we can send this newsletter to you. So you signed up for it, all right? That was the intended purpose. That's what I signed up for. But now I'm starting to get spam from their business partners or from other people that don't have anything to do with the newsletter in the first place. So did they sell my information? Or did they trade my information with another company for some of their information? You know, they might say, hey, we've got 1,000 new users over here. Do you have anything that, you know, we could help each other out here, right? Talking about the businesses on the back end. So instead of me selling you the 1,000 names for $10 and you selling me yours, we just kind of trade off. So now I have 1,000 more users, and you have 1,000 more users. We can target spam, target advertisements. Maybe they make more money. Was it adequate, relevant, and not excessive to the purpose on how they're collecting that information? Is it accurate and up to date, the information that they are collecting? Are they, you know, crawling through web pages looking for old information? Or are they looking for the up-to-date, latest, greatest information? Is it accessible to the subject? Me. Is it kept secure? It's huge. If I give you my personal information for whatever reason, my email address, my name, my phone number, because I signed up for something on your website or signed up for something in your organization, what are you doing with my data? Is it going to be secure? And if you do share it, and I acknowledge that, I let you do that, you say, can I share this with our business partners or other business associates? And I say yes. Now let's say you're moving that data from point A to point B. Is it secure? How is it secure? Who's taking care of the security? What policies do you have? Am I available? Am I allowed to see that information, that policy, so I can see how it's supposed to be done? Is it destroyed after its purpose is completed? If I was to collect a bunch of information on online forum, online whatever, and we're done with the registration, do I destroy that data? Let's say I was going to have a 5K run for charity, and I had an online forum, online form for people to sign up on, right? First name, last name, contact information, shirt size, because you're going to get a shirt, address of where we could mail you information, email address maybe where I can send you information, notifications about the day of the race, any news, things like that. When it's all said and done, the race is over, what do I do with that data? Am I going to destroy it? And then when it is destroyed, we have to remember, think about that remnants. Is anything going to be left over? All important things we got to think about. So we also need to talk about ensuring appropriate retention. Information and data should be kept only as long as it is required. And that's what I was just talking about, right? If I had the 5K run, how long do I really need to keep that data? How long do I need your first name, last name, email address, and contact information, right? I guess it kind of depends. Now that I think about it just a half a second more, because let's say the race is over, right? You may be absolutely right. I don't need that anymore, right? Well, the race is over. You send out notifications for the winners. You thanked everybody for their participation. It's done. But what if you plan on doing it next year? Is it fair to say I can hold on to your information and then send you an email about a month before the race the next year and say, hey, know that you signed up last year for our 5K charity run. It's coming up again. Would you be interested? Just to kind of head them off, right? Because you already have collected a bunch of names that now you can use for PR purposes, or if you want to look at it that way. I wouldn't necessarily call it advertisements for a charity run, but having, getting the word out, sure. So I could kind of see both sides of the story there. If I was a participant, maybe I don't want you holding on to my information. Maybe I do. Maybe I do want to be notified about it next year. But then you have to think about some of the other things we just talked about. Mainly, is it kept secure? Where are you keeping my data? Are you keeping it somewhere on your cloud provider somewhere? Or when I signed up, did you download it and now it's stored on your hard drive on your desktop or laptop somewhere in your home office or in your office? Did you put it on a thumb drive, a removable hard drive? Where is this data and is it kept secure? Those are things we think about, or we need to think about, but we don't usually think about that, especially in our personal lives. In that scenario, I doubt anybody's ever going to think about that. But things like that happen all the time. You can do that in corporate environments as well. We used to have a 5K run for charity at one of my old jobs. And I was responsible for creating the web services, the website, so people could sign up. So that's why it just popped in my head all of a sudden. But that's possible to do, but how long are you supposed to retain that information? Now, organizations, they may have to keep certain records for a period as specified by industry standards. So that doesn't really fit the example I gave you. We're talking about industry standards now. They may have to keep them in accordance with laws and regulations. It says, well, you have to keep these records for so long. 7 years, 10 years, 15 years, 2 years. It depends on the law and regulation or again, the industry standards that fit the organization that we're talking about. Hard and soft copy records should not be kept beyond their required or useful life. That's just opening yourself up to vulnerabilities. The more data that you keep, the harder it's to keep up with, the more you have to secure down, hopefully, the more storage you're going to have as far as hard copies, right? On soft copies, right, I can have a hard drive that's terabytes large, and I can store quite a bit of data on there. But if I was to take a terabyte worth of data and print that data out, I'm going to fill up a room. So do I have a filing cabinet for this? Do I have the physical storage space to keep this stuff? You may go into an attorney's office and they've got file boxes everywhere because they have to hold on to that information for so long. And eventually they start to run out of space, right? They're starting to fill up cubicles and stuff. You go to hospitals, doctors' offices, right? They scan all that stuff in so they can have the soft copies of all of that data because they have to keep it for so long. Now, record retention policies, they indicate how long an organization must maintain copies. So we're going to have a policy in place. We know there's a standard. We know there's a law or regulation. So we're going to write a policy that makes sure that our organization is following those laws, following those regulations, so we don't get in trouble. So for an example, financial transactions related to a fraud case may need to be retained indefinitely or until 10 years after, say, a court judgment. It kind of depends on state and federal regulations and laws, but that, like I was talking about, the attorneys, they may have to hold on to that. The court system may have to have those records indefinitely. Or after so long, like we said, 10 years after the court judgment, they may be able to purge those records and they're no longer on that individual's record. It would kind of go back to the judgment itself. If it was a large case and they've got detained for 20 years, they're obviously not going to take those financial transactions and throw them out after 10 years. They're going to hold on to them as long as they need. You know, we have people appeal things, right? Appeal judgments. So let's say somebody was committed in a fraud case. They got 5 years of detention, or jail time. Well, after 2 years, their attorney may find something, a hole in the case, and appeal that to try to get them back out of jail because maybe they really didn't do it. Or maybe they just had a little bit to do with it and the sentencing is not meeting the crime. So again, those transactions, they'd have to hold on to it because we may have to go back. We have to go look at that information. Now, other information like system logs, they need to be retained for 6 months or longer to ensure appropriate forensics. Again, you may not see something that when it happens right then. You may have to go back in time a little bit, right? You hear about all these data breaches, and you'd say, oh, well, we've been breached. But how long has it been breached? You may have been breached a year ago, and you're just now seeing this, or 2 years ago. So you have to be able to go back and look at all these records that you're retaining, all these logs. The web logs, look at your CISSP logs or SIM. You gotta have to be able to go back and see and paint that picture of what happened at what point in time. And you can go back and say, oh, well, there's where it happened. It happened 14 months ago. All right, so we have to have that to ensure appropriate forensics. And incident response capabilities can use that information again to reconstruct a past event. If we don't have those logs, can't really go back, can you? I've done that. I've been in offices consulting, and they're like, what's happened? So the first thing I do is look for their logs. If they're retaining that information, I'm good. If they're not, I don't really have much to go on, right? I can't really say unless it's happening right now. if they don't have auditing and those logs and those records, or if they purge those records every week for whatever reason, for hard drive space, or because somebody told them to do that, or maybe they just don't know. They say, oh, that's an extra file, let's get rid of them. It just takes up space on our hard drive. And I heard that if you have too much information on your hard drive, it makes it run slower and we got to go faster. So appropriate retention. We need to have those policies in place.